The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a world of deep blue, where the horizon blurred into the sky, calm, silent, uninterrupted. Only the rhythmic sound of the waves breaking the absolute silence of the open sea. But somewhere in that vast emptiness, something was drifting, phantom on the water, moving without a purpose. A merchant vessel, the Mary Celeste, dual-masted brigantine, cutting a lonely figure against the white-capped waves of the Atlantic. At first, it looked completely normal. The sails were still partly raised, catching a gentle breeze that should have guided a crew. The structure was intact. The ship was floating steadily across the water, its wooden hull showing no signs of distress. But as another vessel slowly approached from a distance, something began to feel deeply, hauntingly wrong. There was no movement on deck, no crew watching the horizon, no signals, just stillness. Too much stillness. When the rescue crew finally boarded the ship, they expected damage. They expected chaos, maybe even signs of struggle. Instead, what they found made no sense at all. The ship was perfectly intact. No visible destruction, no burned sections, no broken hull. Everything was in place, as if the ship had simply been paused in time. But there was one problem. The entire crew was gone. Not a single person remained aboard the vessel. As the inspection continued, confusion deepened. The cargo was untouched. Barrels of food were still stored below deck. Personal belongings remained exactly where they had been left. Even navigation tools were still in place. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been looted. No. There were no signs that anyone had planned a long journey away. It looked like the crew had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. The question became unavoidable. Where did they go? The ship was not damaged. The weather had been normal. There were no signs of attack. No distress signals were ever sent. And yet the entire crew had vanished without explanation. 10 experienced sailors. Gone. The Mary Celeste was not a wreck. It was not a battlefield. It was something far more disturbing. A ship that had been left behind, in perfect condition. A mystery that remains unsolved to this very day. As the investigators continued their search, the silence of the ship began to feel heavier. Everything was intact. But not everything was normal. Small details started to raise questions. A few items below deck had been moved from their original positions. Not enough to suggest chaos, but enough to suggest urgency. One of the ship's pumps had been partially disassembled, and a stove had also been taken apart. But there was no clear explanation for why. There were no scorch marks, no flooding, no visible damage that would require emergency repairs. It didn't look like survival efforts. It looked like something had been prepared, and then abandoned halfway through. Then came a discovery that changed everything. The ship's lifeboat was missing. This detail immediately shifted the entire investigation, as it suggested one possibility, as the crew had left the ship. But that conclusion only deepened the mystery. Why would experienced sailors abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel in calm ocean conditions? There were no storms recorded, no structural damage, no visible threat nearby, and yet they chose the lifeboat, leaving behind everything they owned. Leaving behind a functioning ship worth saving. A decision that defied logic. Unless something had convinced them that staying was even worse than leaving. Inside the captain's cabin, the ship's logbook was found intact. Its pages were dry, preserved, untouched. The handwriting was steady and calm. The last recorded entries showed nothing unusual. Normal weather conditions. Normal sailing progress. No distress signals were ever written. No warnings were recorded. Everything suggested an ordinary voyage. Right up until the final entry. After that, the record simply stopped. No explanation. No final message. No clue pointing to what happened next. It's just an unfinished story written in ink. By the time word spread about the Mary Celeste, the mystery had already begun to grow beyond the ship itself. Experts were called in. Reports were reviewed. Theories began to form almost immediately. But none of them fully aligned with the evidence left behind, because every explanation had a missing piece. Something that refused to fit. The ship did not behave like it had been attacked. It did not behave like it had sunk. and it did not behave like a crew had fled in panic. It existed in a strange middle state, too normal to be disaster, too empty to be routine. Several theories were proposed. Some suggested piracy, but nothing was stolen. Others suggested mutiny, but there were no signs of violence. Some believed the ship had encountered a sudden storm or waterspout, but the vessel showed no structural damage. Even more unusual theories appeared over time. Gas leaks, explosions, even speculative maritime phenomena. But each theory collapsed under one simple problem. The evidence did not support panic, and it did not support destruction. It supported something far more confusing. Order. A ship left behind in working condition. As if departure had been intentional but unexplained. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, one fact stood out above everything else. The ship was last seen sailing normally. There was no distress signal, no warning message, no attempt to communicate danger. And yet at some point between the last recorded position and its discovery, the entire crew disappeared. 10 experienced sailors, gone without explanation. No confirmed evidence has ever proven exactly what triggered that moment. Only fragments remain. A ship, a logbook, and silence across the open ocean. The kind of silence that does not give answers easily. Despite more than a century of investigation, only a few facts remain undisputed. The Mary Celeste was seaworthy when it was discovered. There were no signs of battle, no confirmed evidence of piracy, and no structural damage that would explain an evacuation under force. The lifeboat was missing. The cargo was untouched. The ship had been left floating in stable condition. Everything else is interpretation, not certainty. Just educated possibility built on incomplete evidence. Over time, one explanation has been considered more plausible than others. Sudden but localized emergency. Something that caused fear, not destruction. Possibly a misunderstanding of danger. Perhaps fumes from the cargo. Or a mechanical issue that created the impression of imminent disaster. A situation where the crew made a rational decision based on incomplete information. They may have believed the ship was at risk of exploding or sinking. And in that moment of uncertainty, they chose to abandon it. But if that is true, then the greatest tragedy is not what happened at sea. It is what they did not know before they left. The ship itself remained safe, and they never returned to realize it. Even this explanation does not answer everything. It explains why they might have left, but it does not explain why no distress signals were sent. It does not explain why the ship was left in such orderly condition. And it does not explain why no trace of the crew was ever found again. The ocean keeps its silence. And sometimes silence is more disturbing than any answer, because silence means the story did not end properly. It simply stopped. The Mary Celeste remains one of the ocean's most enduring mysteries. A ship found intact. A crew that vanished without trace. And a story that still refuses to close, even after more than 100 years. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between fear and misunderstanding. Or perhaps the full explanation was lost with the waves that carried the crew away. What remains is not just a maritime mystery, but a reminder of how quickly certainty can disappear into uncertainty, and how even the most ordinary voyage can become something history can never fully explain.